Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Lord of the Rings AMA podcast. My name is Matthias Austin, and on this podcast, I do my best to answer any questions you have about Middle-earth, Lord of the Rings, and the wider legendarium of J.R.R. Tolkien. You can submit questions to me at lotrAmapod@gmail.com, just like this week's question, which comes from Nick in Illinois. Nick asks, Bilbo owned the ring for 60 years and wore it a number of times. He wore the ring several times in The Hobbit and also wore it at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring at his birthday party. It's reasonable to assume he wore it on other occasions in the span of those 60 years. Frodo, on the other hand, only owned the ring for about a year and only wore it a couple of different times, Weathertop, Amon Hen, and on Mount Doom. If the ring is so powerful, how was Bilbo able to give up the ring freely after owning it for 60 years, while Frodo was unable to give up the ring freely after only owning it for a year? Frodo not only refused to give it up entirely on Mount Doom, but also refused to let Sam borrow it a couple of times on their journey. Nick, thank you for that question. It's actually one that comes up a lot from fans of not just the movies, but longtime fans of the book as well. As is becoming kind of customary on this show, I'm going to start by giving a real quick top-line answer, and then get into the details. So here's the quick answer, and I will preface this by saying there is a lot of debate in the fandom why this is. This is just my opinion, but if you disagree, feel free to write in, lotrAmapod@gmail.com. Anyway, here is my answer. The ring has Sauron's power in it, so its power is weaker when Sauron is weaker. And this just isn't in terms of innate ability, which grows as Sauron conquers more, but also distance. So the closer the ring is to Sauron, the more power it has. Bilbo resisted it because he lived hundreds of miles away, while Frodo carried the ring to the very center of Sauron's domain. Now, before I do a deep dive into all of that, I do want to clear up some things related to how long Frodo has the ring. In his question, Nick says that it seems like Frodo only has the ring for about a year. And if you just watch the Peter Jackson films, that absolutely seems to be the case. In the movie, we see Bilbo give up the ring. We'll talk about that scene later. Gandalf gives it to Frodo that same night. Then he says, keep it secret, keep it safe. Then we get this montage of Gandalf riding to Minas Tirith, looking at some documents, getting alarmed. And then he returns to the Shire, and he jump scares Frodo with, is it secret? Is it safe? As he comes home from the bar. And the whole thing happens in the course of minutes in the movie, but given how long it later will take the Fellowship to get from the Shire to Gondor, it's fair to assume that in the movies, several months at least have passed, and then you add in the journey of the Fellowship, and about a year seems accurate. But that is not the timeline in the books. See, in the book, Gandalf makes sure that Frodo has the ring, warns him about putting it on, and then he leaves for 17 years. While Frodo's hanging out in the Shire, Gandalf teamed up with Aragorn, tried to track down Gollum for years, I think maybe 8 years, before giving up. Then he goes to Minas Tirith, and he pours through 3,000 plus years worth of documents to try to find out any information about the ring. About Sauron's ring, specifically, and the ring that Isildur cut off Sauron's hand. Then he receives word that Aragorn finally tracked down Gollum, who's being held in Mirkwood. So then he travels up to Mirkwood to question Gollum, and then learn his history, which finally confirms some of his suspicions about the ring. Then he travels back to the Shire. So as a side note, this is also before he meets Shadowfax, the world's best and fastest horse. The best case scenario is during this whole time, he's borrowing several other horses throughout the journey, or else he was just walking. Now I understand why Peter Jackson compressed the timeline. The movies are already long, and adding all of that would have been too much for audiences. And I guess he could have put in like a 17 years later title card or something, but without explanation, that's just going to add more confusion. Plus, you'd have to figure out how to deal with the actors not aging, and so I get why he left it at an amount of time happens, but I do think it's added to some of the confusion about this topic. So the ring was in Frodo's possession for a while, 17 years, and it likely did subtly work on his mind. This would be a good time to talk about what exactly the ring is and what it does. The ring is, at the most basic level, a power amplifier for Sauron. Within Tolkien's worldview, evil can't create anything on its own. only Iluvatar can do that. And if you want to know who Iluvatar is, listen to last week's episode. But when evil wants to make new things, they have to give up a portion of their own innate abilities to do so. It's implied that Melkor does this with the creation of his minions, dragons and orcs, though the question of what's up with orcs should be its own episode. The power then gets dispersed amongst these things that are created, which leaves less for the power giver. In the Silmarillion, there's this description given of the creation of Sauron's ring, the One Ring. Now the elves made many rings, but secretly Sauron made one ring to rule all the others. And their power was bound up with it, to be subject wholly to it, and to last only so long as it too should last. And much of the strength and will of Sauron passed into that one ring. For the power of the elven rings was very great, and that which should govern them must be a thing of surpassing potency. And Sauron forged it in the mountain of fire in the land of shadow. And while he wore the One Ring, he could perceive all the things that were done by means of the lesser rings, and he could see and govern the very thoughts of those that wore them. Now, Sauron is a Maya. He's a sort of angelic being like Gandalf, actually. He had a great deal of innate power, but in order to control the actions of others wearing magic rings, he sacrificed some of his power by putting it into the One Ring. This plan, by the way, eventually failed because the elves sensed him putting on the ring and they stopped wearing theirs once they knew he had his on. The dwarves couldn't be controlled because they're just innately too stubborn. He was able to corrupt men and turned them into Nazgul, the ring wraiths, evil spirits that did his bidding. We even get flashes of this power of control over others when Frodo has the ring. When they capture Gollum in the Two Towers, Frodo tells him, in regards to Gollum trying to steal the ring back, "You will never get it back. In the last need, Smeagol, I would put on the precious, and the precious mastered you long ago. If I, wearing it, were to command you, you would obey, even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into the fire, and such would be my command." Now, I also do think there are limits to the ring's power, and they depend on the innate power of who's wearing it. So Boromir wanted to use it to command the armies of men to defeat Sauron. He's a commander of troops, a powerful human. Someone like him could command armies with it. The thought of Aragorn, descended from Númenóreans, heir of Isildur, who cut the ring from Sauron's hand, using the ring was enough for Sauron to empty Mordor in an all-out attack. Gandalf and Galadriel just refused the ring because they knew they absolutely could vanquish Sauron, but they would then be corrupted and become Dark Lords themselves. See, hobbits have almost no innate power in Middle-earth, which is why Bilbo and Frodo, I think, were able to resist it for so long. Frodo could command Gollum with it, maybe Sam, maybe other hobbits, but I think he probably would have struggled to command Aragorn and to bend Aragorn to his will with it. Sam, when he had the ring, he wasn't even tempted to control people. He just wanted to make Mordor a giant garden. I think that Gollum with the ring, who has the least innate power of anyone we see in the books, would really just be able to continue surviving like he had been. So Sauron's innate power is in the ring, and it amplifies the powers of those who wield it. We also know that the ring has an innate desire to return to Sauron. And how much agency it really has is up for debate. We're told by Aragorn that the ring draws the Nazgul, but it doesn't draw them so much that they don't still need to stop and ask for directions on how to get to the Shire. Gandalf says that the ring left Gollum, but it didn't just start rolling towards Mordor. It slipped off of his finger and lay on the ground. Did it have a plan? It certainly didn't know Bilbo would pick it up. Maybe an orc would stumble across it, and in doing so, it would eventually get passed along until it made it back to Sauron, but there's no clear what the ring's plan was. I think that the desire to get to Sauron is what makes people desire the ring so much and to do the evil things they do with it. See, if the ring entices you to do evil acts to keep it, like Smeagol killing Deagol, well, Sauron's the ultimate evil. So enough evil will eventually lead back to him. That's just my guess. That's just speculation of like why people covet it so much, is because the ring wants them to do evil stuff, so that way eventually it'll make its way to Sauron. And the last thing we know for sure that the ring does is it turns its wearer invisible, and it allows them to see the Wraith Realm, for lack of a better term. When Frodo puts on the ring at Weathertop, surrounded by the Nazgul, we get this description in the books. Immediately, though everything else remained as before, dim and dark, the shapes became terribly clear. He was able to see beneath their black wrappings. There were 2 tall figures, one standing on the lip of the dell, one advancing. In their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes. Under their mantles were long gray robes. Upon their gray hairs were helms of silver. In their haggard hands were swords of steel. Their eyes fell on him and pierced him as they rushed towards him. Desperate, he drew his own sword, and it seemed to him that it flickered red, as if it was a firebrand. One advancing was taller than the others. His hair was long and gleaming, and on his helm was a crown. In one hand he had a long sword, and in the other a knife. Both the knife and the hand that held it glowed with a pale light. And I could be wrong on this, but I think that's the only description we ever get of what the Nazgul look like beyond just wearing long black robes. The Witch King, the leader of the Nazgul, he's invisible beyond just his robes and an iron crown when Éowyn stabs him beneath the crown where his face would be, but she never sees it. Only by wearing the ring could they be seen. So that's the context of what the ring is, what it does, and what it wants. So why was Bilbo so much less affected by it than Frodo? And I think my answer is I don't really know that we can say that he was. Sauron himself was weaker and not looking for the ring during the 60 years that Bilbo had it. And he used it a lot in The Hobbit, and he would occasionally use it to hide from the Sackville Bagginses, but I don't think he ever used it for evil. And Gandalf suspected that the reason Bilbo wasn't as affected was because he didn't kill Gollum to get it, and that was the first time in the ring's history it wasn't taken by force. But when it came time for Bilbo to give up the ring, I don't know you can say he was fully willing. This is the description of the scene in the Fellowship of the Ring when Gandalf is encouraging Bilbo to leave the ring to Frodo. "Well, if you want my ring, say so," cried Bilbo. "But you won't get it. I won't give my precious away, I tell you." His hand strayed to the hilt of his small sword. Gandalf's eyes flashed. "It will be my turn to get angry soon," he said. "If you say that again, I shall. Then you will see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked." He took a step towards the hobbit, and he seemed to grow tall and menacing. His shadow filled the little room. Bilbo backed away to the wall, breathing hard, his hand clutching at his pocket. They stood for a while facing one another, and the air of the room tingled. Gandalf's eyes remained bent on the hobbit. Slowly, his hands relaxed, and he began to tremble. And from that point on, Bilbo then agrees to leave the ring, even though he almost takes it with him again when he finally actually starts to leave the room. But it did take some pretty heavy-handed intimidation from Gandalf to get him to that point. The fact that Bilbo didn't fight and did eventually leave it peacefully is an enormous achievement, but he needed that help to actually do it. Now let's compare this to Frodo. Frodo offered to give the ring to multiple people throughout the course of the books. When Gandalf asks for the ring to prove it is the One Ring by throwing it into the fire, Frodo does hand it over, but the book does tell us that it suddenly felt very heavy, as if either it or Frodo himself was in some way reluctant for Gandalf to touch it. But he did hand it over. In the same chapter, upon learning the ring needs to be destroyed, he immediately offers it to Gandalf to take and destroy. And Gandalf says, "No, don't give it to me. I would use it for evil." And in a scene omitted from the movies, Frodo and the other hobbits meet Tom Bombadil, which is way too big of a topic to talk about here, in the Old Forest, and Tom asks him for the ring, just wants to see it. And Frodo doesn't even hesitate when giving it to him. Tom, of course, just gives it right back. During the Council of Elrond, Frodo asks if the ring belongs to Aragorn as the heir of Isildur, though it's kind of unclear whether he was relieved or worried by that. Aragorn then refuses to claim it as his. In Lothlorien, Frodo says to Galadriel, "You are wise and fearless and fair. I will give you the One Ring if you ask for it. It is too great a matter for me." Of course, she refuses just as Gandalf and Aragorn did. So at first, Frodo does try to give up the ring willingly. But that changes as the journey goes on. As Frodo and Sam journey with Gollum, we're told repeatedly how the burden for Frodo gets heavier as they get closer to Mordor. When Frodo's been captured by the orcs and Sam has the ring, we get Sam's account of looking into Mordor while in possession of it. This is what it says. It says, "His thought turned to the ring, but there was no comfort there, only dread and danger. No sooner had he come in sight of Mount Doom, burning far away, than he was aware of a change in his burden. As it drew near the great furnaces where, in the deeps of time, it had been shaped and forged, the ring's power grew, and it became more fell, untamable, save by some mighty will." I'm skipping ahead a little bit. "Already the ring tempted him, gnawing away at his will and reason." Sam has the ring for a matter of hours and feels his will and reason being gnawed away. So imagine how Frodo would be feeling, having had it for over 17 years at that point. And with each step towards Mordor, the influence and power of the ring grows heavier. By the time they reach Mount Doom, Frodo's barely able to crawl. There's a reason Sam has to carry him. And it's not just physical exhaustion, it's spiritual exhaustion. We get, once again, Sam's POV on the last stage of the journey as they approach the foot of Mount Doom. This is what it says. It says, "All this last day Frodo had not spoken, but walked half-bowed, often stumbling, as if his eyes no longer saw the way before his feet. Sam guessed that among all their pains he bore the worst, the growing weight of the ring, a burden on the body and a torment to his mind. Anxiously, Sam noted how his master's left hand would often be raised as if to ward off a blow, or to screen his shrinking eyes from a dreadful eye that sought to look in them. And sometimes his right hand would creep to his breast, clutching, where the ring is around his neck, and then slowly, as the will recovered mastery, it would be withdrawn." At the very end of their journey, as they looked into Sammath Naur, the cracks of doom where the ring was forged, Frodo is finally overwhelmed by the power of the ring, and he puts it on, claiming it for his own. And in that moment, immediately Sauron sees him, and he sends his Nazgul on their flying beasts to Mount Doom to stop Frodo. And they probably would have succeeded in getting him if Gollum wasn't there, because I truly believe that there is no one in Middle-earth, with the exception of Tom Bombadil, and even then it's unclear how much power he actually has outside of the Old Forest. No one could have willingly destroyed the ring. It was an amazing feat that Bilbo voluntarily gave it up, but leaving it to his nephew is a very different prospect to destroying it. Now, Frodo offered to give it up numerous times on his journey, but the power of the ring was too strong for anyone to resist in the end. Had it not been for Gollum biting off Frodo's finger and losing his footing, the ring wraiths would have captured Frodo, delivered the ring to Sauron, and evil would have won. But just as I think that no one could have willingly destroyed the ring, I also think that no one else other than Sam and Frodo, with the help of Gollum, could have even gotten it that far. In the same way that Gandalf said Bilbo could only have given up the ring because he spared Gollum's life and didn't commit an act of evil to get it, Frodo held off temptation until the very end because it was given to him freely. And it wasn't a fault or a weakness unique to Frodo that stopped him from destroying it. It was the inevitable end of a long journey of the ring constantly influencing his mind. So why would Bilbo willingly give up the ring and Frodo couldn't? Because Bilbo didn't have to deal with the ring in the same way Frodo did. There is one other reason, one from a literary standpoint. When Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, he was writing a kid's story that wasn't meant to be anything more than just that. And in the first edition of The Hobbit, the first one that came out, when Bilbo wins the riddle contest, Gollum had promised him a present, a magic ring that would turn him invisible. But Bilbo had already found it on the ground, and Gollum was so sorry that he didn't have the present, and he was apologizing over and over to Bilbo because he didn't want to be seen as cheating at the riddle game. And Bilbo said, you know what, it's fine. Just, how about you just show me how to get out of here? And so Gollum does that, and they leave on somewhat good terms. Bilbo's creeped out by Gollum, but there's no Baggins, we hates you forever, right? Bilbo found the ring, got into a riddle contest, won. Gollum was upset that he couldn't give a present to Bilbo. Bilbo said, just let me out of here, and we'll call it square. And so Tolkien, in The Hobbit, he had put in some random references to his past writings, those early writings of Middle-earth, things, references to Gondolin, which is a great kingdom from the first age of Middle-earth, an elven kingdom that was destroyed by the armies of Morgoth, and they get the swords from Gondolin. But he kind of just put those in there for himself. He was just like, oh, this would be fun to throw in this reference to this other stuff that nobody has read. This is just a fun one for me. But mainly his focus was, I'm just writing a children's book. So he threw in these references. Some would go into Silmarillion for his own amusement, but there was really no intention of connecting it to a larger story. But then The Hobbit got really, really popular, and his publishers asked him to come up with a sequel. And Tolkien said, okay, I guess I could do a sequel. I don't really think I have any more stories about hobbits, but I'll see what I can do. And he said, hey, actually, you know what? The story that I'm coming up with, I think maybe it would be better if I made that a sequel to this unpublished stuff that I've already been kind of working on, the Silmarillion. Can I write the Silmarillion and then write a sequel to the Silmarillion? And the publishers basically said, no, people love hobbits. We need you to make a story with hobbits. So he said, okay, I'll go with the Hobbit angle, but I'm going to incorporate more of the lore from my unpublished Silmarillion. And he incorporated Bilbo's ring into this larger story. But it was so different, this influence, this power of the ring and the character of Gollum, that he actually had to go back, and he did a second edition of The Hobbit, where he changed it to the version that we are used to. And the second edition of The Hobbit, the Riddled in the Dark chapter, matches the tone of the Lord of the Rings a little bit more. The ring has more mystery to it. You get more of this evil, corrupted vibe from Gollum. And then to retcon that, in the chapter on the Council of Elrond, Bilbo they're going through the whole history of where everybody's been in the ring. And Bilbo stands up to tell his story about how he got the ring. And he looks to the dwarves and he says, hey, dwarves that are here, you maybe have heard a different version of this story before. I shouldn't have lied to you. Here's the real version. And then he tells the version that's in the second edition, with the implication that the first edition is the lie that Bilbo told the dwarves. Tolkien he's really good at the retcon and like fitting in the narrative devices to make it all fit together well. But that's another reason why the ring doesn't affect Bilbo in The Hobbit in the same way it does Frodo in Lord of the Rings. It's because in The Hobbit, it wasn't the one ring. It was just a magic ring. Now, fun fact about this is in 1960, Tolkien actually decided to rewrite The Hobbit and make it stylistically fit with Lord of the Rings in terms of tone and maturity. And he only got about 3 chapters in before giving it up and said, you know what, let The Hobbit be what it is. Let Lord of the Rings be what it is. They don't fully match in tone. Some of the whimsical elements of The Hobbit I'm pulling out. I would have loved to have seen how he would have redone the tra-la-la elves in The Hobbit to match Elrond and the powerful elf lords that we see in Lord of the Rings. Vastly different people. It can kind of throw you off when you're reading The Hobbit and you get to, they come to Rivendell and the elves are all singing, oh tra-la-la-la, oh tra-la-la-la, where have you come from, tra-la-la-la. And then you get to Lord of the Rings and the great elf lord Glorfindel rides his horse and fights off and, stands up against the ring wraiths, and Elrond is this powerful healer, and it's all very austere, and it's just very funny, the different styles. But Tolkien said, it's not worth it trying to make these things match. But that's another reason why the effect of the ring on Bilbo is so different in The Hobbit than on Frodo's because it wasn't meant to be the one ring. So there you go, Nick. That was a long answer to your question. Hopefully a satisfying one. And if you, like Nick, have a question, email in at lotramapod@gmail.com, lotramapod@gmail.com, and I will be happy to answer any questions you have. Remember to subscribe, leave a 5-star review, all that good stuff you do to spread the word about podcasts. Hopefully pretty soon I'll be launching an Instagram. I'm just waiting for some things to finalize before I can get going with that. And I will, Iluvatar willing, be back next week. See you then.